You see the headlines flashing across your screen, the bold red banners announcing that federal agents have entered Mar-a-Lago and seized boxes of documents from a private vault. You see the footage of crates marked with classification stamps being loaded into vans and the immediate explosive reaction from legal teams and political pundits on every channel. It looks like a spy thriller or a political drama designed to keep you glued to the television, waiting for the next revelation about what exactly was in those handwritten notes or financial ledgers. But if you stop there, if you only look at the spectacle of the raid itself, you are missing the far more significant story unfolding beneath the surface. This is not just about one former president or a stack of papers. This is a stress test of the fundamental machinery of our state, a collision between the executive branch, legislative oversight, and the concept of private property that underpins our entire economic system. What you are witnessing is a rare and volatile moment where the theoretical power of the Senate Intelligence Committee transforms into physical action, piercing the protective veil that usually surrounds the highest levels of capital and political influence. When we talk about economics and power on this channel, we often discuss the invisible rules that govern your life, the tax codes, the interest rates, the regulations that determine whether you can afford a home or how much you pay for groceries. Usually those rules operate quietly in the background, but today the machinery is loud. The Senate seizing documents from a former head of state is a signal to the markets and to the world that the stability of our institutions is currently in flux. Markets hate uncertainty, and political instability is the ultimate form of risk. You might be sitting at home thinking, this is just another chapter in a partisan feud that has nothing to do with your job or your savings. But I want you to look closer. When the mechanisms of accountability at the very top of the pyramid are strained to the breaking point, it creates ripples that eventually touch the foundation. If the rules of engagement for the most powerful individuals in the country are up for grabs, the predictability of the system that protects your contracts, your labor rights, and your pension funds becomes less certain. Let us walk through what actually happened here, stripping away the sensationalism to look at the mechanics. The Senate Intelligence Committee issued a direct subpoena. This is a legal instrument of immense power, derived from the legislative branch's duty to oversee the executive and protect national security. When that subpoena was allegedly ignored or insufficiently answered, the escalation to a physical seizure represents a breakdown in the normal diplomatic channels that usually exist between government factions. Agents entered a private residence, a club that also serves as a nexus of high society networking and deal-making, and physically removed assets. In this case, the assets were information. Information is the most valuable currency in the modern economy. The top secret and eyes-only designations are not just stickers, they are classifications that define who has the right to know how the state operates. By seizing these, the Senate is asserting that the public's right to oversight through their elected representatives supersedes the individual's claim to privacy or executive privilege. You have to understand the context of why this matters to the structure of capitalism itself. Our economy relies on a delicate balance between public trust and private accumulation. We generally accept that leaders and wealthy individuals have a zone of privacy. But when that privacy is used to potentially shield actions that affect national security or public finance, allegedly hidden in private financial ledgers or recording transcripts, the equation changes. The accusation here is that these boxes contain smoking gun evidence. In economic terms, this is about information asymmetry. Someone held information that the market, in this case the electorate and the oversight bodies, did not have. When you trade a stock or sign a mortgage, you rely on the other party being transparent. If the person at the top of the chain is hoarding critical data about the state's operations or liabilities, the market is rigged. This seizure is an attempt to correct that asymmetry, to force the books to open. Think about the inventory list that was leaked. We are hearing about financial ledgers. Why would a Senate Intelligence Committee be interested in personal financial ledgers alongside national secrets? This suggests the investigation is looking at the intersection of state power and personal profit. This is the crux of political economy. How much of the state's machinery was used for private gain? If those documents reveal that policy decisions that might have affected your industry, your wages, or your taxes, were driven by what is in those private ledgers rather than public interest, then this is not just a security breach. It is a breach of the fiduciary duty that a leader owes to the people. It is the same principle as a CEO looting a company, but on a national scale. The reaction from the legal team, calling this an illegal raid, is also part of the system. They are defending the sanctity of private property and the privileges of the office. This is the tension we see in every major regulatory battle. When the EPA tries to inspect a factory polluting a river, the factory owners claim overreach. When the IRS audits a billionaire, they claim harassment. The defense is always that the state is intruding too far. But here, the state is intruding upon itself, or rather upon a former iteration of itself. The Senate Majority Leader stating they had no choice because documents were at risk of destruction introduces the concept of preservation of evidence. In the corporate world, if a company shreds documents before an audit, it is a crime because it destroys the ability of the market to know the truth. The Senate is arguing that the history of the executive branch, the record of what was done in your name, was about to be erased. As we dig deeper into this, I want you to consider your own relationship with authority and documentation. If you are audited, you have to produce every receipt. If you apply for a loan, you have to open your financial life to the bank. You live in a world of total transparency towards the institutions that hold power over you. Yet, at the level of the presidency, there has been a fight to maintain total opacity. This seizure flips that dynamic. It is a moment where the heavy hand of the state, which usually weighs on the working class, has turned to grip the shoulder of the ruling class. It is a rare spectacle, but we must analyze it not as theater, but as a precedent. If the Senate can seize the most private records of a former president, it establishes a new baseline for accountability, but it also raises questions about how stable our political norms really are. If every transfer of power involves raids and seizures, do we look like a stable, developed economy, or do we look like a volatile emerging market where the rules change with every election cycle? The smoking gun narrative is powerful, but we need to be careful with it. In economics, we look for causality, not just correlation. Just because documents were seized does not mean they prove guilt. However, the act of seizure implies that the Senate Intelligence Committee has seen enough preliminary data to take a massive political risk. They would not send agents into Mar-a-Lago without a high degree of confidence that what they would find justifies the firestorm that follows. This suggests that the institutional immune system is kicking in. When a body detects a virus, it creates a fever to burn it out. The political chaos you are seeing on the news, the shouting, the accusations, the leaked lists, is the fever. The question is, what is the virus? Is it the alleged mishandling of secrets, or is it something deeper within the financial and political entanglement of the former administration? We need to talk about the eyes-only files. These are documents restricted to a handful of people. When you have a clearance, you are part of a trusted inner circle that manages the empire. To have those files sitting in a basement in Florida, accessible potentially to guests or staff without clearance, is a breakdown of the state's monopoly on violence and information. It devalues the currency of classification. If secrets are everywhere, they are nowhere. And if the state cannot keep its own secrets, how can it protect the integrity of the financial system or the power grid? This is why the Senate moved. It wasn't just about what was in the files, it was about reestablishing the boundary between the state and the private citizen. The blurring of that boundary is where the real danger lies, and it is precisely what we need to examine when we look at the specific items listed in that leaked inventory. Among the classified briefings and intelligence reports, the presence of private financial ledgers is the detail that should make your ears perk up. In the world of high finance and global economics, money is never just money. It is a trail of relationships, obligations, and leverage. If a president is keeping personal financial records, ledgers that perhaps detail debts, loans, or business entanglements mixed in with the nation's most sensitive secrets, we are no longer looking at a simple records dispute. We are looking at the potential commodification of state intelligence. You have to ask yourself, why were these things stored together? In a rational system, your personal checkbook does not sit next to the nuclear launch protocols. When they do sit together, it implies that the owner sees them as part of the same portfolio. It suggests that the geopolitical strategy of the United States and the profit margins of the Trump organization were perhaps being managed as a single consolidated balance sheet. This is where the concept of conflict of interest stops being a bureaucratic buzzword and starts being a systemic threat to your economic security. If foreign policy decisions, tariffs that affect the price of the steel in your car, or trade deals that determine whether your factory stays open, were influenced by what is in those private ledgers, then the market has been distorted by corruption. We talk about free markets, but a market cannot be free if the regulator is making rules to benefit their own private holdings rather than the public good. That is not capitalism, that is extraction. It is a form of rent-seeking where the asset being rented out is the presidency itself. The Senate's interest in these ledgers suggests they suspect a direct link between the secrets that were kept and the money that was made. They are looking for the receipt that proves the public trust was sold. And then there are the recording transcripts. The inventory mentions recordings that Trump never wanted the world to see. In the history of political economy, tapes are often the undoing of power because they capture the unguarded reality behind the polished public image. Nixon had his tapes, now we have these. For an economist, a transcript is data. It is raw information about intent. If these recordings capture conversations with foreign leaders, lobbyists, or donors that contradict official policy, they reveal the shadow mechanism by which our government actually runs. It means there is an official script that you see on the news and a real script that determines who gets the contracts and who gets the tax cuts. The Senate seizing these is an attempt to merge those two scripts, to force the shadow reality into the light, so that we, the shareholders of this democracy, can see how our company has actually been managed. Now consider the sheer mechanics of this seizure. This was not a polite request. The Senate Intelligence Committee, a body that usually operates in the quiet, sterile hallways of the Capitol, sent agents to physically extract these crates. This is a muscular assertion of legislative dominance that we rarely see. It tells us that the legislative branch, the branch closest to the people, has decided that the executive branch has gone rogue. In institutional economics, we look at checks and balances as a way to prevent monopoly power. Just as we break up a monopoly company that controls too much of the market, the Senate is trying to break up the monopoly on information held by the former president. They are saying that no single individual, no matter how popular or powerful, owns the truth. The truth belongs to the state and, by extension, to the people. But let's look at the pushback. The cries of illegal raid and political persecution are not just defense tactics. They are a signal to a specific base of supporters that the institutions are illegitimate. This is dangerous for the economy because an economy runs on trust. If half the population believes the FBI and the Senate are corrupt enforcers of a deep state cabal, then the rule of law begins to fracture. We are seeing a contest over who has the legitimacy to enforce the law. Is it the elected Senate or is it the charismatic leader? If that question isn't answered clearly, if this seizure is seen as a partisan hit job rather than a necessary act of preservation, it introduces a level of political risk that scares away long-term investment. Why would you build a factory in a country where the police might raid the opposition leader's home on a whim? Or conversely, why would you invest in a country where the leader can steal state secrets with impunity? Both scenarios are bad for business and bad for the stability that your job depends on. We also have to acknowledge the timing. The Senate Majority Leader claims they moved because documents were at risk of being destroyed. This introduces the element of urgency. In financial markets, when you hear a rumor that a bank is insolvent, you run to pull your money out. That is a bank run. What we are seeing here is an information run. The Senate feared that the asset, the truth contained in those boxes, was about to be liquidated, shredded, or flushed down a toilet. They had to act fast to preserve the solvency of the historical record. If those documents had been destroyed, we would have faced a permanent deficit in our understanding of the last few years. We would have been left with the debts of the decisions made, but no record of why they were made. Think about what this means for you. Sitting at your kitchen table, you follow the rules, you pay your taxes, you renew your tags, you keep your records for 7 years in case the IRS comes knocking. You live under a microscope of bureaucratic compliance to see the highest levels of power engaging in a frantic game of hide and seek with national records is a slap in the face to every law-abiding citizen. It reveals a two-tiered justice system where the rules are rigid for the many and flexible for the few, until suddenly they aren't. This seizure is the system snapping back. It is the moment where the elasticity of privilege reaches its limit and the law snaps back into place. The agents walking out of Mar-a-Lago with those boxes are not just carrying paper. they are carrying the restored weight of the law. However, we must remain analytical. We cannot get swept up in the triumphant narrative that justice is being served just yet. We have seen these investigations before. We have seen the Mueller report, the impeachments. Often they end in a cloud of smoke with no fire. The system is designed to protect itself, and often that means protecting the elites from true accountability to preserve the illusion of stability. The Senate may have seized the documents, but what will they do with them? Will they redact the most damaging parts to protect the dignity of the office? Will they cut a deal behind closed doors? The seizure is just the first step in a supply chain of accountability. The raw material has been gathered, but it still needs to be processed. And in Washington, the processing plant is where the truth often goes to die. We need to keep our eyes on the smoking gun that sources claim is in there. What constitutes a smoking gun in an economy like ours? Is it evidence of treason, or is it something more banal, like evidence of massive tax fraud or using the presidency to secure loans? Often the crimes that bring down powerful men are not the grand conspiracies, but the petty greed. Al Capone was brought down by tax evasion, not murder. It is entirely possible that the top secret stamps are hiding something as simple and depressing as a scheme to inflate property values or dodge a creditor. If that is the case, it strips away the mystique of the strongman and reveals the grifter underneath. And that, in many ways, is more damaging to the brand than any spy novel plot could be. As we move to the next part of this analysis, we are going to look at the specific players involved in this drama. We need to understand the motivations of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the legal team defending the vault, and the silent bureaucratic machinery that finally decided to say enough. We will look at how this impacts the upcoming hearings and, crucially, how the markets are reacting to this sudden injection of volatility. Because make no mistake, when the political ground shakes, the economic foundation cracks, and we need to see where those cracks are forming to understand what happens to your security next. To understand the full weight of this moment, we have to look closely at the specific actors who set this chain of events in motion. We are not just talking about a vague entity called the government. We are talking about the Senate Intelligence Committee, which effectively functions as the risk management department of the United States. In any massive corporation, the risk management team is usually the most conservative, cautious group in the building. They are the ones who say no to risky deals to protect the firm from catastrophic failure. For this committee, a body that typically operates in the shadows, dealing with abstract threats and diplomatic cables, to authorize a physical seizure at the home of a former president means the risk calculation shifted violently. They decided that the cost of inaction, the cost of leaving those documents in that basement, exceeded the massive political cost of the raid itself. In economic terms, the liability on the balance sheet became too toxic to hold. They had to liquidate the problem before the next hearing, which acts as the quarterly earnings call, where the true state of the nation's security must be disclosed to the public. You have to ask yourself why the timing is so specific. The prompt mentions a desperate race to get these boxes before the next hearing. In the corporate world, you see this scramble right before an audit. Everyone tries to get the files in order to make sure the numbers match the reality. The Senate is rushing because they know that information is perishable. If they go into that hearing without the physical evidence, they are trading on speculation. But if they walk in with the actual smoking gun, the handwritten notes and the transcripts, they control the market of the narrative. They are trying to corner the market on the truth before the defense can flood the zone with alternative facts. And this is a battle for leverage. Whoever holds the paper holds the power to define history. And right now, the Senate has physically repossessed that leverage. Think about the human element on the ground, the agents who actually executed this seizure. While the pundits argue in television studios there were real people, likely making a middle-class government salary, walking into a billionaire's private club to take back state property. This is a stark visualization of the class dynamics at play. You have the labor of the state, the agents, confronting the capital of the political elite. Usually, capital dictates the rules to labor. But in this moment, the state asserted its monopoly on force. It is a reminder that ultimately, property rights and privacy are granted by the state, and the state can revoke them when the social contract is violated. For the guests at Mar-a-Lago, watching their sanctuary breached by federal agents must have been a shock to the system, a realization that their proximity to power does not grant them immunity from the machinery of the law. And what of the legal defense we are seeing? You hear them shouting about overreach, but look at the incentives. A legal team for a figure like this is not just paid to win, they are paid to delay. Time is a commodity. If they can tie this seizure up in court for months or years, the political impact dissipates. The market moves on. The voters forget. They are trying to engage in regulatory arbitrage, finding loopholes in the process to stall the inevitable. But the Senate's aggressive move suggests they anticipated this. By seizing the documents first and arguing the legality later, they have reversed the flow. Usually the state asks for permission. Here, they took possession. It is the difference between asking a debtor to pay up and simply repossessing their car. The Senate has repossessed the car, and now the debtor is left standing in the driveway, shouting at the tow truck. It is a humiliating, jarring shift in the power dynamic. This brings us to the smoking gun evidence that sources claim is inside those crates. We need to think about what kind of information acts as a smoking gun in the modern political economy. It is rarely a single document that says, "I hereby commit a crime." It is usually a pattern. The financial ledgers mentioned are likely the key. If you can cross-reference the dates of specific foreign policy decisions with the dates of specific deposits or debt restructuring recorded in those private books, you build a picture of transactional governance. This is what terrifies the establishment. It is not just about one man. It is about exposing the porosity of the barrier between public service and private enrichment. If it turns out that the presidency was being run like a private equity firm, stripping assets from the state to pay down personal debts, it devaluates the entire concept of public office. It tells you, the taxpayer, that your contribution to the state was just revenue for someone else's business model. The Senate's desperation to secure these files before the hearing also suggests they fear what we call counterparty risk. They likely suspect that there are other copies or that the information was being prepared for sale or leverage. In the world of intelligence, information is only valuable if it is exclusive. If those eyes-only files were being shared, or if there was a plan to release them selectively to damage opponents, the Senate had to intervene to stop a chaotic dumping of state secrets. Imagine a disgruntled employee leaving a tech company with the source code for their flagship product. The company would sue immediately to stop them from selling it to a competitor. The United States government is the company, the classified docs are the source code, and the Senate is the legal department trying to stop the IP theft. The immunity that seemed to surround him has evaporated. For investors, donors, and political allies, this is a signal to reevaluate their exposure. If the Senate can breach the inner sanctum, then the protection racket is over. You might see a pulling back of support, not out of moral outrage, but out of financial self-preservation. Nobody wants to be the last investor holding the bag when the regulators shut down the fund.